All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to host tonight's event with Clarke launching her new book, Thin Girls. She will be talking with Danielle Trussoni, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for making this happen and to all of you for showing up. Greenlight storefronts are currently closed, but our community is still here, and we're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping things I want to go over. So you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you, but they can see the chat. So if you have any comments that you want to make, you can pop them in the chat. It's sort of towards the bottom. If you move your mouse towards the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a chat, and you can chat there, and they'll be able to see and respond to that. And if you have anything that you want to be answered in the Q&A, there's a Q&A icon as well, and that is specifically for the Q&A, which will happen towards the end. So make sure to put them there and not in the chat. We'll be recording tonight's event, so look for an audio, a video or audio version either on our website or social media channels later on. And tonight's featured book, Thin Girls, is available for sale on greenlightbookstore.com. Though our stores are closed, we're working with our supplier warehouse to fast direct-to-home shipping. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support, and we're offering it for 15% off. You can purchase it from Greenlight's website this week for the 15% off price. Look for the buy link and the coupon code, which I will be posting in the chat shortly. Our interviewer for this evening is Danielle Trussoni. She is a New York Times, USA Today, and internationally best-selling author whose books have been translated into more than 30 languages. Danielle has been a jurist for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction and writes the horror column for the New York Times Book Review. She has an MFA in fiction writing from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her work has received a Missioner Copernicus Society of America Award and the Dana Award in the novel. Her first book was chosen by the New York Times as one of the best 10 books of the year. She lives in the Hudson Valley of New York with her family. She'll be speaking with our featured author, Clarke. Purdue MFA with Roxane Gay as her thesis advisor and University of Utah PhD candidate. Diana is a New Zealander who now lives in Salt Lake City. Her work has been published in Glimmertrine, The Rumpus, Black Warrior Review, The Masters Review, and Hobart, among other places. Thin Girls is her first novel. She is at work on a second novel, Celebrity, which follows a professional ballerina turned exotic dancer turned sex worker as she rises to fame, attempts to navigate her celebrity, and is subsequently destroyed by the attention. Diana's new book, Thin Girls, is a dark, edgy, voice-driven literary debut novel about twin sisters that explores body image and queerness, as well as toxic diet culture and the power of sisterhood, love, and lifelong friendship. Diana is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Danielle and with all of you. So please take it away, Diana.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to read, hi everyone. I'm going to read from my screen instead of the book. See, Harper sent this whole box of books to my house in Utah pre-quarantine, and then I went back to New Zealand, and then I flew back here, but I'm not in Utah, and so I didn't have a copy of my book, and I realized I had to read from it tonight. So I went to a bookstore today, and I bought it, and the salesperson was like, oh, this one's brand new, and that really would have been my time to say something normal, like, yeah, I wrote it, but I didn't, and I was like, oh, cool, that's cool. And then she was like, I love the cover, and I said, you know, me too. It's so pretty. And then she was like, did you read the jacket though? I've heard it's really heavy. And I was like, yeah, I read the jacket. Anyway, I just booked it out of there. But I have a copy of my book now. I'm going to read on my screen anyway. I'm sort of jumping between chapter 1 and chapter 2 in the prologue, and so I went through that whole humiliating ordeal for nothing. Anyway, I'm just going to read. The group leader is showing us how to pre-eat. Preheat, I say. Pre-eat, she says. Pre-eat, she nods. Yes, pre-eat. She lifts her hands into parentheses, as if showing us the size of a fish. Not a very big fish. A minnow, maybe. The space she's holding looks important. The other girls in the group follow suit, lifting hands, curving fingers, all trying to be one another. I follow along too. bracketing my palms. I'm just trying to be like everyone else. Isn't everyone? Isn't it the impetus behind laughing when happy, crying when sad, shaking hands and bless you, how are you, good thanks, fine thanks, behind driving single file, walking down the sidewalk single file, the impetus behind wearing capris, then ripped jeans, sideburns, then bangs, behind liking ABBA, no, Ariana Grande, and toe rings and adult coloring books and Facebook. The humanist of instincts is to follow, and the group of us, all of us, we're just trying to be human again. So we do it, we follow. Animals love to follow one another too. Their collective is often named for the verb they enact together. A group of bees is a swarm, crocodiles a basque, a group of elephants a parade, flamingos a stand. A family of hippopotami is a bloat. Lemurs make up a conspiracy, a leap of leopards, a crash of rhinoceroses, a knot of toads. Parrots are a pandemonium. Skunks are a stench, a group of thin girls in recovery. We're surviving. It was 1994, we were 5, making paper dolls. Lily slipped and snipped her hand with a pair of scissors, sliced right through the webbed smile that connects thumb to forefinger. Before she had time to shout out, to start crying, I took my own pair of scissors to my skin, closed my eyes, and pinched the blades closed. The thin flesh cut easy as craft paper. I didn't cry. As we nursed our bloody wounds, our mother said, if Lily jumped off a bridge, would you follow her then? Yes, I told her. Now, says the group leader, her voice meant to be calming, slow as a tidal change. Imagine what might be between my hands. A chain of paper dolls, says a thin girl, whose name I don't know. I stopped bothering with names after a week or two. They die or they leave. These are the options for thin girls in the facility. Not me. I've been here an entire year. The group leader likes to tell me it's inappropriate to think of your endurance here as an achievement. I like to tell her, would you tell the pyramids of Egypt that their endurance is an inappropriate achievement? Then the group leader says something like, perhaps we should unpack the strange comparison you've made between yourself and one of the great wonders of the world. But I hate to unpack. I haven't unpacked since I got here. I like the ephemeral feeling that comes with a full suitcase, the in-betweenness. I'm not thin enough for my body to shut down, too thin to live in the real world. I'm not dying, not living. I'm surviving. Welcome to my purgatory. I'm Rose. No, it can't be paper dolls, says the group leader. It has to be a food, pre-eating. Let's just imagine it's a sandwich, says the group leader, and we all agree that there could plausibly be a sandwich between her parenthesized hands, if only there weren't not a sandwich there. Can you see it, says the group leader. I can't, but I do want to impress her and I do want to recover, so I nod and say, along with the crowd, yeah, I see it. I see the sandwich. The group leader smiles. Now I want you to try not to think about the calories in this sandwich, she says. Think about something else. 1995, I was 6 when I first heard the word anorexia, and I thought it must be a kind of dinosaur, some relative, maybe a second cousin of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. She's pale beige and beautiful, long neck, slim build. She looks like a horse, if only a horse were taller and transparent, and not a horse. She's an herbivore, how she cranes her neck to nudge the leaves of a ginkgo with her snout, knocks fruit free, sends it tumbling down the trunk for fellow creatures to feast, how she blinks, slow as her lope, how she tiptoes despite the size of her feet. She wants to make no mark on this world, anorexia, not even a footprint in long grass. If you want to be graceful, it's best not to exist. She has always been more idea than animal. When the group leader gave me this journal, she told me, write it all down. The weight of a book. I flexed my hands. I told her, I wish I had no hands. She said, you do, so use them. She used to find me charming, my quirky condemnation of corporeality. I never meant to be cute. I meant that I too wished to be more idea than animal. 1996, we were 7. I told Lily that if she didn't eat the broccoli off my plate, I'd hold my breath until I died. She laughed, until my cheeks bruised blue. Then she ate. There's a knock on the door to the group session room, and we all turn, invisible sandwiches suspended, mouths wide and about to bite. She's standing in the doorway, tall and thin. She looks like a streetlight. She's wearing a top hat and a bow tie to hide her balding, her bones, respectively. She can't fool us thin girls with that gaudy getup. We've tried every trick in the book to keep our starvation to ourselves. Her eyes are rimmed with black pencil, and it makes them look cartoon, like those animated eyes that can boing out of a skull in surprise. She's so familiar, this new thin girl, and the other sandwich holders too are squinting with recognition. Cat, she says. Then she licks her palm and uses it to bat at a feline ear that isn't there. Like cat, she says, but with a K. It's that, the gesture, the voice so low it crawls. We know this thin girl. Cat Mitchell's Child Star, her song, the only one she ever released, appears like an unwanted guest. The chorus, something about falling in love with a girl. There was outcry about the sexualization of the singer, Cat Mitchell's, who was 13 and wearing golden hot pants on stage. There was more outcry about the sexual orientation of the singer, Cat Mitchell's, who called herself a lesbian on live television. She's a kid, the people said. How can she possibly know she's gay? How can your kids possibly know they're straight, said Cat Mitchell's in a talk show interview that took over the world for a moment. Then she stuck out her tongue. It was pretty, pink, studded silver, and it drew to a point at the tip. Cat Mitchell's was so cool. You know Madonna, Mariah, Miley? Cat Mitchell's was cooler. She wore men's jackets wide open with nothing underneath. She dyed her hair neon and shone like a nightclub. She looked like a fucking Friday night. She chewed gum like it was part of her biology and blew big pink bubbles that never splattered rubber over her face when they popped. Parents hated her. Lily and I, watching the show from our bundle on the couch, eyes and mouths wide. Do you have a crush on Cat Mitchell's? Lily asked. What, no? I said, heterosexually. That's where I'm going to stop.
Great. And so, well, I love that you read that passage because it encapsulates so many things about the book. I know it's the beginning and it's supposed to, right? It's supposed to introduce people to the themes and the main characters and all of that. But it really does, and I found it very interesting. I'm going to skip, actually, I was going to ask this much later, but since you just read that, it sort of also encapsulates some of the ideas that you have in the book you're currently working on about celebrity. So clearly this is something that has been sort of bubbling in your consciousness for a while. So we can talk more about that in a minute. But the first question I wanted to ask you is, for those people who haven't read the book, because it did just come out today, tell us a little bit about Lily and Rose's relationship. Who are they? What's their connection? And what does it have to do with their bodies?
Okay, so the whole story is about a set of twins. This is the hardest question. The rundown of the book question is the hardest one. I feel like I should have such a good elevator pitch at this point. I just don't.
A pitch, or you don't even have to say the whole, what the whole book is about, but just who are they? How old are they when the book opens? Where have they been? What's their connection with each other?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got our sisters, Lily and Rose, and we meet Rose in the present in an eating disorder recovery facility. And Lily is out in the world. She's really no less damaged than Rose, but her mode of self-harm, which is overeating and binge eating, as opposed to Rose's anorexia, is sort of seen as less severe by society, which is so true and real, but we don't have to get into that. So Lily is sort of living a quote unquote normal life. She's working, she's dating, and she's getting herself into these really toxic relationships. And then in a series of flashbacks, we learn how the twins got to where they currently are. Rose has always sort of been the lesser twin. She feels less intelligent, she feels less beautiful. But when the popular group, the popular girls at school, discover this rite of passage that is dieting, Rose realizes that starving is something she's really good at. It doesn't require her to do anything at all. And it doesn't help that she's got a huge crush on the leader of the popular girls at school, but she refuses to acknowledge that crush or her sexuality in general, because her ultimate goal in life is essentially to be her sister, to be Lily, who is straight. Yeah, so Rose's dieting spirals into anorexia. She's eventually admitted to this facility where we meet her, and where she remains for over a year until her sister Lily visits one day with the news that she's seeing this new man that Rose gets a really bad vibe about, and that she started this new diet that consists of eating as much as you want so long as everything you eat is 0 calories. Yeah, and so Rose decides that she has to help her sister, save her sister, now that Lily has an illness she can recognize, and that she feels she can do something about. And so she sort of breaks her way out of the facility to save her twin.
Yeah, I felt very connected to them, actually. I mean, I think that that's something that drew me into the book, the initial connection that you describe. Also, the way that we see these girls, you know, for such a long time through the flashbacks. And I love when you buy the book and when you look at it, you'll see that they're introduced by their ages and their weights at certain points, and you know how their weight is the same for so long, and then they hit one point in adolescence where it starts to diverge, which I thought was a really interesting way to structure the book, and also very effective to help us see how different they become, but how they're still connected. And I wanted to ask kind of a writerly question. So what came first for you? These characters, you know, their personalities, Lily and Rose as people in the book, or the concept of opposites around the female body? Because reading the book, it's so easy to fall, because the characters are so well drawn and so engaging that it doesn't ever happen, but it's easy to sometimes view it as a metaphor, right? Or to see it as these two girls as a symbol for our society's views about women and their bodies, and even ourselves, right? Me as a woman, I've often throughout my life had both views of myself. And so I wanted to just ask you, as a writer, what came first for you, the concept of what they symbolized, or these girls themselves?
Yeah, so the story was initially about a single protagonist. It was just about Rose. And it was about her struggle with her anorexia. So the short answer to your question is that I guess the concept came first. Actually, her voice sort of came first, and it was very clearly a sick voice. It was a voice I recognized, and the concept sort of grew out of that. But with a single protagonist, the story was so insular and claustrophobic, and it was really basically unreadable. Rose is, you know, she's really ill and she's isolated, and she's the narrator, and being inside her head while she's focused only on herself and her sickness is super exhausting for readers, and for me writing it, actually. And so on a narrative level and a character level, introducing Lily was the introduction of a form of relief from Rose's thoughts, and a way for the story to grow outside of Rose's mind, which is an obsessed mind and a lonely mind. And by bringing Lily into the story, Rose, and by association the narrative, are able to expand and breathe and address life outside of Rose's fixations. Rose is also just I think, a really unlikable character a lot of the time. She's annoying and selfish and narcissistic and self-destructive, and I needed readers to root for her. Her struggle to survive makes up so much of the narrative arc, and if readers didn't care about Rose's development, her recovery, then it would be impossible for them to care about any of the book, which isn't great. So since Rose couldn't really win over any readers with her bad personality, she's not really likable. So the way I sort of hoped to coax readers into caring about her, about the protagonist, was by proxy. You know, Lily is a likable character, I think, at least. She's selfless when it comes to Rose, and she's kind and caring. And up until the story's present, she's essentially put her own life on hold in order to nurse Rose back to health. So if readers care about Lily and Lily cares about Rose, then readers should also care about Rose. It's all just a big trick.
Well, I thought, I mean, I didn't find her as unlikable as you describe her. I don't know if it's because I know personally so many girls and women who have experienced a lot of the things that she has. But I felt an enormous amount of empathy for that character. And I agree. I think that having a double, right, or a reflection alongside does help in some ways. But also I thought something that you did so well and that really lightens it. You know, when this bookseller said that it's really heavy, okay, well, yeah, the subject matter is heavy and it's important. You know, that's not a reason we should shy away, but also it's very funny. Right, I have to say that, you know, I found myself laughing at certain points, and the writing is very witty. The characters are very smart, and you know, the interplay between the other characters, whether it's when in a flashback with their friends in school, or if it's with Kat, who is a great character too. You know, I found that you really did a good job of making a difficult situation in some ways feel almost a little bit light in the best way, meaning effervescent, right? I didn't ever feel like a gloominess in the story, but that I think is because of the beauty of your writing. So I think you did a great job with that. And I wanted to ask something, you know, that maybe is a little bit annoying.
Let's do it.
But you know, I'm asking because my first book I wrote as a novel. It was this, you know, I wrote it as an MFA student, and it was this long novel, autobiographical novel, and it ended up getting an agent and it ended up not selling. And then I took the same subject material and I wrote it as a memoir. My first book ended up being a memoir because it was so much about me that when it was in novel form, people would read it and it was really too heavy, right? Like when you talk about heavy, like that was really unreadable. So I just wanted to ask you if there's parts of yourself in this book, experiences that you've had that you brought to it, that you wanted to write about. Is there some autobiographical element?
Yeah, this is very, just extremely autobiographical. And I think that if I'd written it as a memoir, I think it would have been too heavy. It allowed me to get some distance from the experiences. It sounds really mean, but sort of by burdening characters with stuff that I have been through, experiences I've had, I was able to get some sort of distance from them and some perspective. When I started writing this is my MFA thesis, and I wanted to write the book about celebrity and privacy and bodily autonomy. And when I was talking to Roxane about that, she basically said, "That's great, I love it. How much research have you done?" And I was like, well, I've been reading People magazine since Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt were still together, so a lot of research, basically. And she said, yeah, you're going to have to scratch that, and you're going to have to use something from your own archive. You just don't have the time to do the research you need to do. And that was really the last thing I wanted to hear. I've always known that this was a book that I should write and could write, but it felt too soon. In a lot of ways, I didn't feel ready to write about those experiences. But when Roxane Gay tells you to mine your trauma, you pick up your pickaxe, and I don't even know if miners use pickaxes, but this is my book launch. And so I mined my own trauma for it. I dug through my own experiences, and for me, that was years of dealing with a cocktail of mental health issues, from body dysmorphia to anorexia and dissociative episodes. It's like the worst cocktail ever. Yeah, it was my story, and I knew how to write it, and I knew how to tell it in a way that did the experiences justice. And it's also a story I knew should exist in the world, because, you know, when I was going through that stuff, I was looking for it. I was reading medical journals and articles, and that wasn't much fun. And I was reading a lot of YA, because I think there's a common misconception that eating disorders are adolescent illnesses, which just really isn't the case. And again, there's a lot of nonfiction and memoir out there about eating disorders, but nonfiction always feels to me as reader like reading someone else's story, which is great. But I wanted a book that I could insert myself into and see myself in and project my experiences onto. And that book, I couldn't find that book. And so I hope that this book is that book. So to answer your question, it is extremely autobiographical, but also fictionalized in a way that I do hope makes it lighter and more readable than the experience actually is.
I think it does. And I think that, you know, casting this in literary fiction is, you know, a really brilliant way to step aside and step around the issue of as you called it, heaviness, or, you know, what, you know, in my first book, which ended up being an autobiographical, a memoir, you know, it's right next to you 100% of the time, the trauma that you're writing about. And I didn't feel that in this book. I felt like even if I hadn't experienced anything like this, I could enter the book and still really enjoy it. You know, so for all of those readers out there who just want to read an amazingly written story that transports you into another place, this is definitely it. But I also wanted to say, I write the horror column for the Times, and you know, one place that you might have looked is in horror, because there's a lot of women writing something called body horror, right? And it's when it's done well, it can be extremely powerful, because it explores a lot of the themes that are in this book, but in a really it's so clear that it's like, you know, that it's metaphorical, right? Because it's, you know, using creatures or supernatural elements to explore what women go through with their bodies. And it's extremely interesting. So you might, you know, step into that genre and look if you're interested in reading something like that.
I'm thinking about Carmen Maria Machado. She sort of does the body horror stuff. And I just finished The Ancestor, your book, The Ancestor, which kind of touches on the body horror type thing too, with, you know, the almost monstrous human being, or the sort of reversion to the ancestors and the way ancestors' bodies looked. Yeah. So it's really interesting that it also deals a lot with eating and anorexia. I always see it as such a contemporary illness, but that's just obviously not the case.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so embedded in women's lives and in the culture around how we live that I think that sometimes we even forget, you know, that it is so much a part of who we are. And to that point, there was one place in the book that I just wanted to point out. There's a couple, but there's one that I wanted to point out on page 43. And it's, do you mind if I just read it? Or do you?
Please, no, read it.
Before I was admitted, I had to answer a questionnaire. Do you monitor what you eat? Do you count your caloric intake? Do you think you need to lose weight? Do you skip meals on purpose? Do you feel fat? Ask any woman these questions. Admit us all to the facility. This is what you have done to us. This is your monster, and it's starving. Okay, so those couple of sentences, I think, really capture the theme of this book, and actually the monstrosity of what you are dealing with in this book, and the anger. And I loved that. I loved that passage. And, do you want to talk just a moment about how you came to harness that energy and to condense it so well right there, but it did not actually, it's not in, it's in the rest of the book, but it's not showing up on the page in the rest of the book. Were there techniques other than introducing another character that you used to sort of keep the anger out?
I think a lot of it was, in Rose's mind, Rose doesn't, at least not initially, feel angry about dieting. She wants to be thin. It's what she needs to be. And obviously I, as writer, have so much anger about the dieting industry and that culture. But acting as Rose, it's in first person, I was speaking as her. It wasn't really something I thought about. It was very easy, and probably because of what I've been through, it was very easy to sort of capture her passion for thinness and for doing anything she possibly could to take up as little space as possible. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It wasn't a very direct question. It was more, about a feeling, and also an appreciation that I think that those couple of lines really do capture so much in such a condensed and powerful way. And just to sort of play, I want to say we are going to open up this to questions from people who are here. So if people would like to start writing questions in the chat box, I'll see it and I will ask Diana. We're going to do that in a little while, not right now, but just so we have those questions there. Something I also noticed is that there's a quote, I think we're going to chapter 24, from, I don't know where it is exactly, but it's from Alice in Wonderland. Oh yeah, it's the beginning, chapter 24. There's a line in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland that reads, "How funny it'll seem to come out among the people that walk with their heads downwards." And the line right before that, the reason I'm pulling this out is the line right before that in Alice in Wonderland is about her falling, and she's saying, "I'm falling through the earth." And that's the title of my first book, the autobiography, because I used that same quote as an epigraph. And I think that there's something magical about Alice in Wonderland for young women writing about their lives. In this book, there's the obvious comparisons of, eating one thing and you grow big, and, eating something else and you grow small. But also the whimsy and sort of magical tone that permeates the book, because there is a light, as I keep saying, there is a lightness to it despite the heavy subject matter. And I'm wondering, obviously you've read Alice in Wonderland. Did you see this as did you see that book as an inspiration? Did you think about it when you were writing this book?
It is a book that I love. One of my epigraphs is also, it might be the exact quote you used.
So funny. Let me look.
It is.
Oh, it is?
That one?
No, it's not the exact one, but it's right in that same paragraph.
Right. Yeah, I love the book. I don't like the movie. I love the book. But I think that surrealism that exists in Alice in Wonderland, again, you never really know what exactly you're reading about, but the feelings are there. It acts as a really great distancing tool, I think. It's a way of writing about very real, visceral things in a way that maybe isn't so harmful or isn't so difficult. And this book was initially much more surreal than it ended up being. I took up a lot of the story's real estate until I realized that I was using the surrealism as a way of avoiding having to talk candidly about disordered eating and the real nitty-gritty logistics of it. But eating disorders really are already surreal in and of themselves. You're going against your most basic animal instincts and refusing your body its most biological function. Really, there's already an otherworldliness to that, and by spinning those details with even more surrealism, the result was too removed from the fact, and it was unrecognizable as an experience of the illness. So I pared it way back and wrote the disease in a more realistic way and let the habits of the thin girls reflect more honest behaviors. And I think as a result, it is more dangerous than it would have been if it were happening up in the ether somewhere. Yeah, and now the remaining surrealism is, I think, the book's various settings and the tones that come with those settings, the sort of sterile clinical facility and the ethereal nature of the third and final part of the book. And there's also that surrealism that accompanies Rose and Lily's twinship, which is that they can taste one another's emotions, right? And that's a surrealist element that kind of acts as almost a substitute for the very real uncanniness that exists in the bond between twins anyway. Things like idioglossia and shared pain and other emotions that we hear about all the time. I've never heard about this specific experience, tasting one another's emotions. So I guess it's surreal, but I think it's also within the realm of belief.
Right. I mean, synesthesia of different forms is so interesting when you find it in fiction. I don't know, I think it's not explored. I love when an author will create a very extremely realistic world like you have, and then add those elements, and it feels suddenly very surprising, which I found in your book. I wanted to ask you, actually, there was one part that I just remembered. I hadn't intended to ask you about this, but I also loved the sort of, it wasn't so direct, but it was almost at an angle, this sort of explanation about eating, how they came to this inheritance of eating and how their mother had a certain way of being with them about food. But then when the mother was gone, their father would be like, basically like, we're free, let's, eat really badly and order pizza and Chinese and everything. And then it was all cleaned up in the morning and like, it didn't happen. There's something sort of surreal about that as well too, right? This sort of lack of habitualness or even honesty between this married couple about what eating is and what it's teaching their children. So I don't know if I really have a question, but I just wanted to, make a comment, I guess, about how interesting it is. Okay, so here's a question. Do you feel that these patterns are learned? Or do you feel that it's something that it's like really hardwired?
I think eating just as an animal is biological, but we're at a point now where eating is no longer simply a way to satisfy hunger. It's a social ritual. It's a stigmatized and surveilled performance of the body. We see people perform it every day on social media. You see people posting their meals, and you see supermodels holding slices of pizza to their mouths. And really the most animal of practices has become performative, and that's scary. Yeah, and so I think Rose sort of enacts the performance of her mother, which is the dieting and the thinness and the, sort of feminized perspective surrounding the ritual of eating, whereas Lily follows more in her father's footsteps, which is seeing food as liberation and a way out of the body and out of the self. So I think the answer to your question is it's both. It is an animal behavior and it's a learned behavior because of the way the world is about bodies and the way bodies should look.
One of the characters that I really loved was Kat, for a lot of reasons, but also, because she's so hard on the outside, right? And I wonder how, and you just brought up about eating being basically Instagrammed to the world, and supermodels holding up pizza and people basically not lying about the reality of food and what it is to us and eating habits, but performing it, as you said. And I'm wondering if that is something that you're going to carry into your next project, not specifically with food, but the idea of performance and hiding the sort of reality of emotional well-being and the self.
That is such a strange question and such an accurate question that I'm just wondering, like, who has talked to you about my next book? At this point, it is all about performance, really. If I had to give you the one word summary of what the book is about, it's about performance and about whether we are more than our various performances or whether that is the performative self is the real self. I steer away from basically anything to do with dieting or eating in that book. So there's no sort of ritualistic eating or performing eating in that way, but there are a variety of other performances, performing womanness and performing sexuality that definitely arise instead of this performance. So it turns out I'm just obsessed with performance in general.
Well, I can't read it. It sounds perfect for our moment in time, I have to say. I'm gonna just go over and ask a few questions from the Q&A, and then I have more for you. I can come back if we exhaust.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is from John. What's one thing you wish you knew before you started editing your novel with editors at a publishing house? So actually, also I'm gonna just say, why don't you tell us, before you answer that, what was your journey to finding a publisher?
Yeah.
For those writers out there.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with my journey to finding an agent, if that's okay. Roxane told us, we were in a novel workshop, and Roxane told us how to reach out to agents. She told us what a query letter is, and she told us what needed to be in a query letter, and that was something that I loved my MFA program, but we didn't talk about the logistics of publishing. We talked about writing. We talked about writing out the wazoo, but we didn't cover the mechanics of publishing. And so you sort of end up with all of this material that you've come up with and workshopped and worked over and over with people, and you feel good about it. But then there's a wall, and you don't really know where to go beyond that. So Roxane teaching us about query letters was amazing. And so she told us, basically, she said, start out by reaching out to 3 agents of books you admire. Turn to the back of a book. She went down to the very basics. Turn to the back of a book you love and whose work you're in conversation with. Find the agent and send them an email. And that's really what I did. And so I was just in my agent's slush pile. I was lucky that she read it, her assistant read it, and then passed it up to the next assistant, maybe, I don't know. Eventually my agent got it. I think Susan's watching, and read it. And so that was the process for finding an agent that just, I wish it was talked about more. And I wish the mechanics of publishing was talked about more too, in MFA programs and just everywhere. I've found basically every step of the way in publishing to be a total surprise. Everything is so in the shadows that unless you know someone closely that has been through it, you really have no idea what's coming next. So when it came to finding a publisher, we revised the book, edited the book within a couple of weeks. Susan, my agent, sent me a list of publishers she was going to send it to, and editors, and sent it. And over the weekend, I guess they read it, and I had an offer the following week. What was John's question? Oh, about...
Question. One thing you wish you knew before you started editing your novel with your editor at the publishing house?
Okay. I think that I expected the book as it was to become a completely different creature. It's really easy for me to write a draft and to think of it as a draft. And when I think about putting that out into the world for people to see, I want to crawl into a hole and never emerge again. And so I sort of let myself believe that with Terry, my editor, the book would become something that looked absolutely perfect to me and looked like one of my favorite books that I could pick up off the shelf and read. But realistically, you still do all the work. My editor is amazing and she asks really important questions. But that's what they do. They ask questions. They say, this is coming across this way. Is that how it's meant to be? Or I'm noticing these things. And that's amazing, but it's still completely up to you to mold that book into whatever eventually goes out into the world. Do I wish that I had known that it was all me? No, because I think the pressure would have crushed me. But that is something that was very surprising for me.
Yeah, I know. I feel like if we knew everything that we knew about writing and publishing when we were starting, we might have been like, oh, I think I'll be a brain surgeon instead.
Yeah, there would be 2 writers in the world, total.
Right. Okay, so there's another question. So Roxane had a lot of influence on this novel, and you took a lot of her advice. Was there anything you pushed back on? Anything you fought really, really hard to keep? And that's from Carrie.
Oh, hi, Carrie. Roxane wanted me, the best thing Roxane did for the book was tell me how slow it was. It was really slow. I do this all the time. I've done it with my new book. I never learn, as I start out so slowly creating the world and the characters, and then it's like plot, 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 end of the book. And that is the pattern that I go through. And Roxane basically said the book can't be this slow in the beginning. Readers need reasons to keep the book in their hands, to keep turning pages. And so Kat Mitchell's the celebrity in the beginning didn't exist, wasn't part of the story, right up until really late in the game, basically, maybe a couple of weeks before my thesis was due. And Roxane said, you need to introduce something that helps turn pages. And Kat Mitchell's was my answer to that. She wanted to get rid of the prologue, which maybe I agree with her now. I probably shouldn't say that. Once the book's published, you should probably just only talk about the things you're happy with because there's nothing you can do about it.
I'll just tell you that I'm still, like, I pick up a book that's published and I take a pen, if I look at it, I have a pencil and I like make changes. It never goes away. Like, you're going to probably want to change things forever.
Yes. I actually can't, I haven't read this book since I turned in the final draft. I can't do it. I read some of the words, even reading just then for this, I was cringing my way through it.
Yeah, well, so that's when it happens to me. If I read actually one of my books as an audiobook after it was pretty much locked and I couldn't make changes, and I was like, oh my, because it is, you know, as a writer, you just want to revise and revise forever. But you just have to let go, right? We just have to let go. Okay, so there's another question from Hannah. Writing a novel is one thing and editing is another. Were there any major discoveries that you found during the editing process?
During my editing process was pretty major. I did some heavy surgery on the book. I didn't read it for a long time. You know, when you're writing something, a draft, you're sitting with it constantly, and it's so easy to be inside it and be incapable of seeing its flaws because it's your house that you've built around you, and even though it's falling down, you can't. There's no way you can see it. It's your house and you love it. So I set the book aside for a while before I started on revisions, and that was truly enlightening. I sort of had the same experience, which was when I picked it up and read it again, I went, what was I doing? So the book it didn't have its ending. It had a really sad, really depressing ending where a lot of characters died in a fire. And I don't know what I was thinking. From the get-go, I knew that this book had to have hope in it. I didn't want it to be the harmful book that it definitely has the potential to be. And that's exactly what I wrote. I wrote a really dangerous, harmful book that ended on a note of sadness and a lack of hope for recovery. And so I discovered that in the revision process, and then sort of beat myself up about it, and eventually wrote an ending that I now think is almost fairy tale happy. But I'm all for it. Yeah.
Well, that leads me to another question from the Q&A bar, from Susan Golem. How are you able to combine humor and horror so well? That's like the hardest question, isn't it?
That's a really hard question, Susan. She's on my team. I think I'm going to quote Freud like a real idiot. But Freud said that this is a really bad summary of what Freud said, but that every joke, every laugh is rooted in fear, basically. He said a laughter is an expulsion, it's a relief, it's a sudden knowledge that you're now an insider, you now know, and you're no longer in the unknown, in the sort of black hole of wondering what is the answer to this joke that happens when you sort of pause before the punchline. So in a way, horror or fear and laughter or comedy are, if you listen to Freud, which no one really should, are intermingled and interconnected already for you. And so I think what I do is basically take that. I kind of do subscribe to that theory. I take that and I let it grow. I think the two are almost opposite ends of a seesaw, and one heightens the potential of the other. If you're in a place of tragedy and trauma, then a joke is made. It is a huge relief, and I think the laughter is heightened, the joy is heightened because you've been in such a dark place.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart answer, because how would, human beings in general, how would we get through life without humor, right? And it's so, it really is wonderful in your book to come across moments of lightness and humor. So, okay, we have quite a few more questions. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them, but let's see. This is from Gabriella. How do you think about structure and plot? Do you know what you're writing toward, or are you surprised along the way? You sort of actually touched on that earlier about speaking with Roxane about needing something to like get the plot moving in the beginning. I guess maybe what you could talk about is, with the new book, since you're doing this right now, are you starting from a position of like, I'm starting with a plot, or are you just writing and discovering?
I really don't think about structure and plot, and I should, because it would save me a lot of time. But I'm so voice-driven and character-driven that I think subvert myself. I sort of become on the page. This sounds so cheesy, but I sort of become the character, and the character is just living, in their world. They don't have a plot. Life doesn't have a plot. And so my first 200 pages usually is just the characters meandering through life. And I usually get to the sort of last third of the book and realize that I don't have any structure and no events have occurred. And so I suddenly have to make things happen in order for it to even be construed as a book. Yeah, and so I really wish that I was a person who sat down and made a skeleton of the book and what it would look like. I think the only reason I can get away with not doing that is because of the beautiful thing that is literary fiction that sort of lets you meander as a character. But if I was working in any genre, I would need to have a plot. Did you, for the Ancestor, I'm just thinking, it's literary, but it is also horror and it is also fantasy, I want to say, kind of. Did you plot that out?
I didn't. I knew where it was going. I knew where it was going, and I knew the beginning that you read was the beginning I opened with from the very beginning, like the very first time I wrote it. Like there was no editing actually in the beginning, but the ending, you know, and I knew where I wanted to go. But the middle, it's like how to get there. No, I just went on a journey with the character. But then I revised about 25 times, right? Like I went through the whole thing many, many times to retrofit a plot. The novel I'm writing now, though, is all plotted. I like created for the first time in my life a plot first.
How has that changed the experience of writing?
I'm writing the first draft a lot faster. And hopefully it will make the editing a bit faster too. But also I'm someone who came to love plot after having none in my first book at all, right? My first book was a memoir. 2 of my books are memoirs and you don't plot them, really. So yeah, I think that, you know, it comes, and maybe it is also dependent on the book, right? With the book that you're writing, if it needs it, it will tell you. Okay, there's a question from Johnny. You mentioned that this work was autobiographical, but chose to push those feelings onto the characters. How do you handle those raw emotions while still being distant so that the focus is on the themes and the characters?
Yeah. How do you
handle those raw emotions while still being distant enough to let the characters handle it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know that I actually did. Writing the book was really traumatic. And it did feel like experiencing those feelings all over again. I was lucky, I think, that I was far enough away from the experiences, just temporally, that I didn't sort of relapse into those same behaviors. But there was a time when that absolutely would have happened. Yeah, so I've been in therapy for a really long time, you know, I've learned to package those feelings, and I sort of just gave the packages to the characters, and let them deal with it. And it was really upsetting to watch them, Rose, for example, go through that descent into anorexia. It did mimic my life in a lot of ways. There are a lot of parallels going on, but again, I was able to gain perspective because of it. I was able to see it from the outside. It's sort of like an abusive interpersonal relationship. It's so much easier for friends to see that you are in a bad situation than for you yourself to see the bad situation. And an eating disorder is an abusive relationship. It's just one with the self. And so by getting that distance and projecting those feelings outside of the self, you get a new perspective. And people ask if it was therapeutic, and I don't think it was, but I do think it helped in allowing me to gain that emotional distance and perspective from the experiences.
Okay, yeah, I can see how it would. And it's interesting that you're already getting the question, was it therapeutic? Every time I write a memoir or I write something that's a little bit autobiographical, of course you get that. Well, I think that's all we have time for. There are more questions and I wish we could answer all of them, but it's 8:31. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Diana. It was really a pleasure to get to speak with you. We do have one more question from your editor. So I am going to since it's your editor,
We should do it. Hi, Terry.
All right. Do you think that someone with an eating disorder can really recover from it, or does it continue to have a hold on you and haunt you?
I didn't used to think that total recovery was possible. And I think there's a common answer that no, full recovery is not possible, and it's something that lives with you, in you, alongside you forever. But I don't believe it. I don't believe it anymore. I think that great therapy exists. I think time helps, but I really do think that there is a way out of that illness. The same way there's a cure for many, many illnesses in the world. It's just another sickness. And yeah, I think recovery is possible. I think we also have to believe that recovery is possible, even if it's not. Having that hope is so crucial for any kind of upturn after you get into the low bottom of that sickness.
Okay, well, thank you for your beautiful book and for sharing this hour with me, and good luck with the publication. And thank you to Greenlight for hosting this. And thank you to everybody who attended and for all of those marvelous questions.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for reading, and thank you for your beautiful blurb. I'm going to frame it and put it on my wall forever. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming and listening, and your questions were awesome.
Thanks so much to Diana and Danielle both for that wonderful conversation. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us. You can purchase the book on greenlightbookstore.com. And if you order before July 7th, you can get 15% off of your copy using the code GIRLS. And that's pasted in the chat if you want to take a look there. And if you miss any of the discussion or just want to give it another watch, we'll be posting the recording to our website or on our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for it there. And thanks so much again to everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.